Do you believe your faith is unshakable? I thought so too, until the day I saw Allah reject me during my near-death experience. You won't believe what happened next. It was a Wednesday like any other. The Istanbul sun shone intensely on the asphalt, creating heat waves that distorted vision. I was heading to the mosque, as I did every afternoon, for the ASR prayer. My name is Ahmed, and on that day my life would change forever. The traffic was heavy, as usual. Horns blared impatiently as I weaved between cars on my motorcycle. I thought to myself, if I hurry, I can still make it in time for prayer. It was in this moment of haste that everything happened. A car appeared out of nowhere, making a sudden turn in front of me. I tried to swerve, but it was too late. The impact was violent, and I felt my body being thrown through the air. The world spun in slow motion, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, the scene before me was surreal. I was floating above my own body, watching doctors and nurses working frantically to revive me. Charging! Stand clear, shouted a doctor, holding the defibrillator paddles. My body jumped with a shock, but I was still there, watching everything from above. It was a strange sensation, as if I was trapped between two worlds. I noticed my family arriving at the emergency room. My wife, Fatima, was in tears, holding our young son, Omar, who was only 5 years old. Allah, please don't take my husband, she begged, her voice choked with sobs. Omar needs his father. My heart tightened seeing their suffering. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them I was there, but I couldn't. I was just a silent observer of my own tragedy. I saw my father, a strong man who never showed weakness, fall to his knees in the hospital corridor. Ya Allah, he cried out, raising his hands to the sky. Spare my son. Take me in his place if necessary. As I watched my family praying fervently, I felt a strange peace envelop me. It was as if their prayers were creating a bridge between this world and the next. It was then that I noticed something different in the environment. A soft glow began to form in the corner of the room. Initially, I thought it was just a reflection of the hospital lights, but I soon realized it was something more. The glow intensified, forming what appeared to be a tunnel of light. It was exactly like the stories I had heard about near-death experiences, but I never really believed they were true. I felt an irresistible attraction towards that light. It was as if all the love and peace of the universe were calling me. This is it, I thought. This is the path to Allah. I began to move towards the tunnel, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. My entire life as a devout Muslim had prepared me for this moment. I was ready to meet my Creator. As I approached, I could hear soft, melodious voices, as if angels were singing. The scent of musk and amber filled my senses, exactly like the descriptions of paradise in the Quran. Ahmed! I heard a familiar voice call me. It was my grandfather, who had passed away years ago. He was at the entrance of the tunnel, smiling warmly. Come, my grandson. There's something you need to see. I hesitated for a moment, looking back at my family in the hospital. My body was still there, fighting for life. Don't worry, my grandfather said, as if reading my thoughts. Your time is not up yet. This is just a journey to learn. With one last look back, I followed my grandfather into the tunnel of light. Little did I know that what I would find on the other side would completely change my understanding of faith, life, and Allah himself. As we advanced, I felt a transformation happening within me. All earthly fears and worries seemed to dissipate. I was approaching something greater, something that transcended my human understanding. Prepare yourself, Ahmed, my grandfather said softly. What you will see next may not be what you expect, but it's exactly what you need. With these enigmatic words, we emerged from the tunnel of light, and I found myself facing a scene that would change my life forever. As I emerged from the tunnel of light, I was enveloped by a sense of peace and tranquility that I had never experienced before. The environment around me was ethereal, with vibrant colors that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. My grandfather remained by my side, his face serene and welcoming. Where are we, Didi? I asked, using the affectionate Turkish term for grandfather. He smiled gently. We're at the threshold, Ahmed. between the world you know and what lies beyond. Before I could fully process his words, an intense light began to form in front of us. My heart raced with anticipation. Is it Allah? I whispered, barely containing my emotion. My grandfather didn't answer, just placed his hand on my shoulder in a comforting manner. The light intensified, taking on a form that I could only describe as divine. It wasn't a human figure, nor something I could really describe with earthly words. It was a presence majestic and overwhelming. My first instinct was to prostrate myself, as I did 5 times a day in my prayers. Allahu Akbar, I exclaimed, feeling tears of joy running down my face. It was then that something unexpected happened. The divine presence, which I was certain was Allah, began to move away. Confused, I raised my head. Wait! I cried out, extending my hand. Please don't go. But the figure continued to distance itself, turning its back on me. The shock I felt at that moment was indescribable. All my life of devotion, all the prayers, all the fasts, everything seemed to have been in vain. I don't understand, I muttered, feeling my heart shatter. What did I do wrong? My grandfather approached, his expression compassionate. Ahmet, sometimes what we see is not what truly is. But Didi, Allah is rejecting me. How can I interpret this any other way? My voice trembled with emotion. At that moment, I noticed other souls passing by us, being welcomed with open arms by the divine presence. Some were Muslims I recognized from my community, others were from different religions, and some didn't seem to have any religious affiliation at all. Why are they accepted and not me? I asked, feeling a mixture of confusion and jealousy. My grandfather sighed deeply. Ahmet, you've always been a man of strong faith, but perhaps your faith has become too rigid. Look beyond what your eyes see. I tried to understand his words, but the pain of rejection was overwhelming. I've spent my entire life following the teachings of Islam. I prayed, fasted, gave alms. What more could Allah want from me? A soft voice, which seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, answered. Perhaps the question is not what Allah wants from you, but what you truly understand about Allah. Surprised, I looked around, searching for the source of the voice. Who said that? My grandfather smiled mysteriously. Truth often comes from unexpected places, my grandson. I felt lost, as if the entire foundation of my faith was crumbling. What should I do now? I asked, feeling more vulnerable than ever. Observe, my grandfather said, pointing to the scene before us. And more importantly, feel. I forced myself to look again at the divine presence that had rejected me. This time, I tried to see beyond the form, beyond the light. I focused not on what my eyes saw, but on what my heart felt. It was then that I realized something surprising. The rejection I felt didn't come from the divine presence, but from within myself. It was as if I had built a wall around myself, made of rigid rules and narrow interpretations, that prevented me from truly seeing and feeling the true essence of the divine. I don't fully understand, I admitted, feeling humble for the first time in a long time. My grandfather smiled, and that, Ahmet, is the first step towards true understanding. Sometimes, we need to feel lost to find the right path. The mysterious voice spoke again. Your journey is only beginning, Ahmet. What you experienced here is not a rejection, but an invitation to a deeper understanding. I felt a change within me, as if a door I didn't even know existed was beginning to open. I'm ready to learn, I said, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. My grandfather nodded in approval. Remember, Ahmet, true faith isn't about having all the answers, but about having the courage to ask the right questions. With these words, the scene around us began to dissolve. I knew I was being sent back to my body, back to my life. But now, I carried with me a new purpose, a new mission. Thank you, Didi, I whispered, as I felt my consciousness being pulled back to the physical world. The last thing I heard before returning was the mysterious voice. Your true spiritual journey begins now, Ahmet. Be open, be compassionate, and above all, love. And with that, I found myself back in my body in the hospital, forever transformed by this unexpected encounter. The constant beep of the heart monitor was the first thing I heard when I regained consciousness. My eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the bright light of the hospital room. Fatima was by my side, holding my hand, her eyes red from crying. "Ahmet, Alhamdulillah, you're awake," she exclaimed, kissing my hand repeatedly. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. A doctor quickly entered the room, checking my vital signs. "Welcome back, Mr. Ahmet," he said with a smile. "You gave us quite a scare." In the days that followed, as my body recovered, my mind was in turmoil. The experience I had during my near-death haunted me. How could I explain to anyone that Allah had rejected me? A week later, I was discharged from the hospital. Back in our apartment in Istanbul, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Fatima noticed my change in behavior. "Dear, what's going on?" she asked one night, sitting beside me on the bed. "You've barely spoken since you came home." I sighed deeply. I saw something when I was unconscious. Something that changed everything. Her eyes widened with concern. "What did you see?" I hesitated, fearing her reactions, but decided to tell her everything. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "Ahmet," Fatima finally spoke, her voice trembling. "This can't be true. Allah would never reject one of his faithful servants." "I know what I saw, Fatima," I replied, feeling a wave of frustration. "I need to understand why." In the following days, I plunged into a frantic search for answers. I spent hours at the local mosque, talking with the imam. "Imam Hassan, please help me understand," I pleaded after telling him about my experience. The old imam stroked his white beard, thoughtful. "Ahmet, sometimes Allah tests us in ways we don't understand. Perhaps this is a call to deepen your faith." But his words sounded empty to me. It wasn't a test that I felt. It was a deep and painful rejection. I sought answers everywhere. I read and reread the Quran, looking for any clue that could explain my experience. I consulted Islamic scholars, attended religious lectures, but nothing filled the void I felt. My obsession began to affect my daily life. I neglected my work, my family. Fatima tried to reach out to me, but I was lost in my own thoughts. "Dad, why don't you play with me anymore?" Omar asked one day, his big eyes full of confusion and sadness. His innocent question hit me like a punch in the stomach. I realized I was losing more than my faith. I was losing my connection with those I loved. Desperate for answers, I decided to look beyond traditional Islamic circles. I began attending interfaith discussion groups, seeking different perspectives. It was at one of these meetings that I met Sarah, a former Christian who now identified as a spiritualist. "Ahmet, have you considered that perhaps what you saw wasn't rejection, but an invitation to a deeper understanding?" she suggested during one of our conversations. Her words echoed those of my grandfather and my experience. "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled gently. "Sometimes we need to feel lost to find a new path. Perhaps Allah is calling you to see beyond the rigid structures of religion." Her words sparked a glimmer of hope in me, but also fear. Was it possible that everything I believed was wrong? My search for answers began to create tension in my community. Friends from the mosque started to distance themselves, whispering that I was straying from the right path. "Ahmet, brother, you need to be careful," warned my friend Mehmet after Friday prayers. "People are talking. They say you're questioning the teachings of Islam." I felt a mixture of anger and sadness. "I'm not questioning Allah, Mehmet. I'm questioning our understanding of Allah." But I knew that my journey was taking me away from everything I knew. Fatima, although concerned, stood by my side. "I don't fully understand what you're going through," she told me one night, "but I know you're a good man, Ahmet. If Allah is leading you down this path, there must be a purpose." Her words comforted me, but the emptiness persisted. I felt betrayed by the faith I had defended all my life. How could I continue to be the same man after what I had experienced? The answer, I realized, was that I couldn't. And perhaps, I thought as I watched the sun rise over the minarets of Istanbul, that was exactly the lesson I needed to learn. "Allah," I whispered to the morning sky, "I don't know where this path will lead me, but I'm ready to follow. Guide me to the truth, whatever it may be." And so, With a heavy but determined heart, I continued my search, knowing that the journey was far from over. What I didn't know was that the greatest revelations and challenges were yet to come. The months following my near-death experience were an emotional roller coaster. My search for answers had led me to places I had never imagined exploring. It was during this tumultuous period that I found what I least expected, a light in the midst of darkness. On an autumn afternoon, I was walking aimlessly through the streets of Istanbul, lost in thought, when I found myself in front of a small cafe. A sign in the window caught my attention. Spiritual discussion circle? All are welcome. I hesitated for a moment, but something inside me urged me to enter. The interior was cozy, with the aroma of coffee and spices in the air. A diverse group of people was gathered in a circle. A middle-aged woman, with a gentle smile, approached me. "Hello, I'm Ice. Is this your first time here?" I nodded, feeling a bit out of place. "Yes, I don't even know why I came in." I smiled. "Sometimes our feet take us exactly where we need to be. Please join us." I sat down hesitantly. The group was a fascinating mix of people. There were Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, and even some who identified as atheists or agnostics. A man named Mehmet, who I later discovered was a former imam, started the discussion. "Today, I'd like us to share our experiences of spiritual transformation. Who would like to start?" Surprising myself, I raised my hand. With a trembling voice, I began to tell my story. As I spoke, I felt a weight being lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I was openly expressing my doubts and fears. When I finished, silence hung in the air for a moment. Then, a young woman named Layla spoke. "Thank you for sharing, Ahmet. Your experience reminds me that true faith is not about certainties, but about being open to mystery." An older man, David, added, "You know, Ahmet, in the Jewish tradition, we have a concept called wrestling with God. Sometimes it's through questioning and struggling that we find a deeper faith." His words touched something inside me. But how can I reconcile this with the teachings I've followed all my life? Ice gently intervened. "Perhaps the question isn't about reconciling, but expanding. Your experience doesn't invalidate your previous faith. It invites it to grow." Over the following weeks, I continued attending the group. Each session brought new perspectives, challenging me to see beyond the limits I had imposed on my spirituality. One day, after a particularly intense discussion about compassion, Mehmet pulled me aside. "Ahmet, I've noticed a change in you since you started coming here," he said. I reflected for a moment. "Yes, I feel lighter somehow, but also more confused." Mehmet smiled. "Confusion can be the beginning of clarity. Remember, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, went through moments of doubt and questioning. It's part of the spiritual journey." His words hit me deeply. "So, you think what I'm going through isn't a rejection of my faith, but an evolution of it?" "Exactly," Mehmet replied. "You're discovering that true faith is a constantly growing garden, not a rigid and unchanging structure." In the months that followed, I began applying what I was learning in my daily life. I started to see the divine not just in the mosque, but in the smiles of strangers, in the kindness of a gesture, in the beauty of nature. One day, while walking with my son Omar in the park, he surprised me with a question. "Dad, does Allah love everyone, even those who aren't Muslim?" I looked at him, remembering how I would have answered before my experience. Now, I responded with a new understanding. "Omar, Allah is greater than any religion or belief. Divine love reaches everyone in ways we may not fully understand." Omar smiled, satisfied with the answer, and ran off to play. Watching him, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. That night, I shared with Fatima the changes I was experiencing. To my surprise, she didn't react with fear or disapproval. "Ahmet," she said, holding my hands, "I see a light in your eyes that has been absent for a long time. If this journey is bringing you back to us and to a deeper understanding of Allah, then I can only be grateful." I realized then that my spiritual rebirth wasn't just about me. It was about how I connected with the world around me, with my family, with humanity as a whole. As I embraced this new understanding, I felt as if I was awakening from a long sleep. The world seemed brighter, more full of possibilities. And for the first time since my near-death experience, I felt truly alive. Years passed since my near-death experience and the subsequent spiritual journey. I had become a kind of bridge between different faith communities in Istanbul, helping others who, like me, felt lost in their spiritual journey. One night, after a long day guiding a group of questioning young people, I fell asleep exhausted but at peace. It was then that I had the most vivid dream of my life. I found myself again in that ethereal space, so familiar and yet so mysterious. The light that had previously rejected me was there, but this time I felt drawn to it without fear or hesitation. "Welcome back, Ahmet," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm ready," I responded, surprised by my own confidence. The light began to transform, taking on a shape that left me breathless. It was a face, my own face, but transformed, radiant with love and compassion. "Well, what does this mean?" I stammered, astonished. The figure smiled gently. "Ahmet, you're finally ready to see the truth. The rejection you experienced wasn't an act of Allah, but a reflection of your own inability to recognize the divine in yourself and in others." The words reverberated through me, awakening a deep understanding. "So all this time," I began. "All this time," the figure continued, "your journey wasn't about being accepted by Allah, but about accepting the Allah that exists in each of us." I woke up with a start, tears running down my face. Fatima, sensing my agitation, woke up beside me. "Ahmet, what's wrong?" she asked, concerned. I tried to explain my dream, the words coming out in an emotional torrent. Fatima listened patiently, her eyes filling with understanding. "My love," she said softly, "it seems you've finally found the peace you were looking for." That morning, I felt an urgency to share my revelation. I called Mehmet, the former imam who had become a mentor and close friend. "Mehmet, I need to tell you something important," I said as soon as he answered. We met at our usual cafe, and I shared with him my dream and the revelation I had. Mehmet listened attentively, a smile spreading across his face. "Ahmet, my friend, you've reached an understanding that many seek for a lifetime. What will you do with this knowledge?" I reflected for a moment before answering. "I think I need to share this with others, not as a new doctrine, but as an invitation to see beyond the limitations we've imposed on our understanding of the divine." In the weeks that followed, I began to speak openly about my journey in our spiritual meetings. To my surprise, many identified with my experience. A young woman, Zainab, approached me after a particularly intense session. "Ahmet Bey," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your words, they gave me hope. I too had an experience that shook my faith. But now I see that perhaps it was just the beginning of a deeper journey." I placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling a wave of compassion. "Zainab, always remember, doubt is not the opposite of faith. Often, it's the path to a more authentic faith." Over time, our small group grew. People from different backgrounds and beliefs gathered to discuss, question, and explore together. Not everyone agreed on everything, but there was a mutual respect and openness that was inspiring. One day, while walking with Omar, now a thoughtful teenager, he surprised me with a question. "Dad, do you think your near-death experience was real or just a dream?" I stopped, carefully considering my answer. "Omar, the truth is I can't be absolutely certain. But what I do know is that, real or not, this experience transformed me in ways I can't deny. It taught me that the divine is beyond our limited definitions, that it exists in every act of love and compassion." Omar nodded, thoughtful. "I see. So, it's not so much about what happened, but about how it changed you and others." I smiled, proud of his insight. "Exactly, my son. True spirituality isn't in extraordinary experiences, but in how we live our everyday life with love and compassion." As we continued our walk, I reflected on my journey. What began as a crisis of faith had transformed into a call for a deeper and more universal understanding of the divine. I realized that my search wasn't over. In fact, it would never be over. But now, instead of fear or confusion, I felt gratitude and a profound sense of purpose. The rejection I thought I had suffered years ago had actually been the greatest gift I'd ever received, an invitation to discover a deeper and more universal connection with the divine, not just in a distant beyond, but here and now, in every moment and in every person I meet.